Well, Victoria's state of emergency looks set to be extended through to Christmas after a last-minute backroom deal between Premier Daniel Andrews and key crossbenchers, including Fiona Patten from the old sex party. She calls it reform, but don't be duped there. And they all previously, as you know, said they would not support, Patten in particular, extending the state of emergency. For more on this, I'm joined now from Melbourne by Victorian Liberal MP and Shadow Minister for Finance, Matthew Guy. Matthew Guy, well, this looks to me to be another power grab from Daniel Andrews, sealed behind closed doors yet again, 5 minutes to midnight. Explain to my viewers at home, who are the crossbench MPs who rubber stamped this extension right through till December, and what do they get for it in return?
Well, Peter, it's still unclear if they've got anything appreciable in return for this, except giving Daniel Andrews a rubber stamp to lock the state down and to destroy business in Melbourne until December. I mean, this is quite astounding that we've got a government that really thinks it's necessary to have state of emergency legislation in operation until December. Think of what that does to the economy in Victoria, a quarter of the nation's population. Melbourne, a city of 5.25 million people, locking down business, snap lockdowns, what it does for investment, what it does for jobs, what it does to our hospitality sector. And all of this from the sex party, the Animal Justice Party, and the Greens, handed to Daniel Andrews with no appreciable gains. OK, well,
if we've got vaccines on their way, if we've got no other states in positions of 3 lockdowns now that you've had in Victoria, nothing like that interstate, what is his argument for the state of emergency powers?
That is a very good question. And every time you ask Daniel Andrews to explain it, he will always answer a question with emotion. He always banks on emotion-beating reason. So he says this is about keeping Victorians safe. Well, if he'd passed specific legislation to manage hotel quarantine like New South Wales has, we could achieve the same outcome without destroying the state's economy. But notice Andrews will always talk in emotion. That's how he justifies all of his arguments, all of his cost blowouts, all of his lockdowns. It's all about emotion, playing to people's fear and emotion. This is about keeping Victorians safe. Well, New South Wales has had fewer lockdowns and far fewer deaths, and they've done this without state of emergency legislation like Victoria. We should pass specific legislation. That's the sensible way forward. That's how New South Wales has done it. That's what we should do in Victoria.
And we also saw too those numbers that came out last week in terms of vaccination rates. New South Wales is up around the 75% of their target. Victoria was down at 30s. We hear tonight that the ADF is now being brought in to assist with the rollout. The opposition was trying to get rolling 1-month extensions. It would force the Premier back into the Parliament to have to explain why after, an April extension it needed one for May and June and so forth. How did that fail? Why did that fail?
Daniel Andrews doesn't want an opposition. He wants an audience. And that's how he treats Parliament. It's an audience. And so it didn't get through. We didn't have the numbers in the upper house to block it. And as I said, he's done a deal with 3 of these minor parties, all left-wing, hard left-wing parties, who have agreed with him that locking down the state for, as I said, no appreciable gain. But you make a good point, Peter. Why is Victoria now trailing other states on per capita rollout of vaccinations? I mean, again, the Premier has said this is all about the safety and health of Victorians. Well, why are we trailing on hotel quarantine? Why do we have the worst contact tracing system in Australia? Why are we now trailing on vaccinations? Everything this guy says he's doing, he doesn't do when it comes to COVID.
Talk to me about the CBD. A lot of Victorians perhaps haven't been to Melbourne over the Christmas break or since the lockdowns. We know that some businesses are starting to come back into the city. That's been very, very slow compared to interstate CBDs, but it's now happening this week. But businesses I've spoken to are absolutely king hit. Those that are opening their doors are king hit. Many others have got the doors closed. Give me your sense of how tough it is in Melbourne.
Peter, Melbourne's CBD has had bipartisan policy for the best part of 20 years to build it into the most thriving, cosmopolitan CBD of its kind in Australia. And it's largely worked from the Kennett government through the Bracks government, the Baillieu government, and through the first part of this government. And that's why Melbourne CBD has been growing faster than growth areas in Australia, in other cities. People want to be here. People want to live here. People want to come here. That's all been absolutely king hit, as you say, because the Premier is not bringing back the public service numbers back into the city. He's locked down small business with snap lockdowns where they've lost millions and millions of dollars. There's no consistency of policy, which is what Victoria needs, consistency of policy. And now he says there'll be a state of emergency effectively through to Christmas. How can any business operate in the second largest city in Australia thinking there's going to be a state of emergency until Christmas? Why would people invest in a city which is offering that? We should be offering confidence to people to invest in Melbourne, confidence to our CBD, and that comes through consistency of policy. That's what we're not getting.
I want to ask you about secrecy because, you know, I've been around government for some time. I thought I had seen it all, to be honest, until I came back to Victoria. Honestly, look, my eyes were opened last year. All throughout the COVID lockdowns, there was denial after denial for access to information. There wasn't the public release of medical advice. Parliament didn't sit, so it couldn't be sought and tabled. I know a lot of my viewers were coming forward with stories where, you know, they had heard this or they'd been told that, and we looked into it, checked out, but was never made public by the government. And we even saw in recent days the government wouldn't speak about spending $70 billion of infrastructure projects money. They wouldn't put the detail out there. Now, you couldn't do that and get away with it in Canberra. So why do you get away with it in Victoria? It
goes back to what I said before. Two things. One, the guy always talks in emotion and thinks that can get him through on press conferences. He'll always say, well, if a road project is blown out, well, Melbourne deserves the best roads in Australia, and we want to get people home, people home on our road system quicker, and don't you think we should be paying more for it, even though they're putting money into something that's just blown out? They talk in emotion. And secondly, he just lies. I mean, this government in Victoria just bald-faced lies. When it came to hotel quarantine, they lied. I mean, no one has still put their hand up and said they were responsible for approving the hotel quarantine debacle in Victoria. It's months on. 800 people died. That's more Victorians died in COVID than the Vietnam War, which is a horrible but true statistic, and no one's taken responsibility for it. The Premier has a Royal Commission about to begin into Crown Casino, yet he won't have a Royal Commission into 800 Victorians' deaths. What does that tell you about the soul of the government in Victoria when they're prepared to lie about 800 people dying in their own state?
I've got to ask you, you know, there are more and more cases of Victorians leaving and going interstate. It has the feel to me of the Kane Kearney years here in Victoria. How does the state turn this around? Well,
it has a feel to me of the start of the Kane Kearney years too. I was here and I saw that as well, and it does feel like that. And we were very proud in the September 1997 quarter to get Victoria back to net population growth from other states in the Kennett government. That's continued for the best part of 25 years and now been lost by the Andrews government. We get back to where we were before COVID by having consistency of policy. And that's what the Liberal and Nationals keep talking about. It's around consistency on COVID policy, consistency on business policy, consistency on how the government operates. Policy consistency will get us through. You won't get that through a bunch of people who treat lying as the first way to get out of a problem and maybe tugging at the heartstrings next. But that's what we've got in Victoria for at least for another 2 years.
And just before we go, what do you make of another ratings downgrade?
Well, it says it all, doesn't it? I mean, as you said, it feels like the start of the Kane Kearney years. Well, here come the ratings downgrades. Here go the Victorians fleeing interstate. This is why the next election in November 2022 is so important, because we've got to change this before we get back to a position where we're potentially $250 billion in debt and leaving that legacy to our children.
It's pretty tough stuff for Victorians to swallow. Matthew Guy, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Peter.